All right, welcome to today's stream. Glad to have you. Glad for joining in. So today's gonna be pretty interesting one. The file that I'll be working with is pretty hefty. So if we get right into it, the animation that I posted earlier today looks something like this. So as I mocked up this, well, more than like mocked up, as I set the animation for this car, here we go, set it to loop, we can see that the car movement is quite jittery, right? There's something I was going for here, which was mainly the car sort of stabilizing at first and then dodging the barrier that's oncoming to then, move closer to the camera and pass through a gate. Although you can't really see that it passes through the gate, it happens so quickly. So my goal there for the animation is going to be to have it smooth in the entry, so less jitter right here, and then actually have it, once it smooths into the street, have it dodge that fence as it's trying to pass another car. So that is a bit more ambitious for me because animation in this sense, especially with cars, is something I'm fairly new to and something I'm definitely just practicing with this challenge. So for this stream, I'm going to be focusing more on the things that I know I need to fix for the environment. Because the environment, I would say, it's like, I wouldn't say 80% there, maybe a little less. But it's very clear to me what I can do to the environment to improve it quite a bit. So first thing is the immediate foreground, where we have the street division with the buildings that are closest. We see here we have a mixture of like old or, today's type of architecture. Definitely more dystopic in a sense. And the idea is to kind of conceal a little bit of the missing details of the building and such by adding in more livery at the ground level. So that would mean trees, it would mean street lights, things like that around the buildings to just sort of mask the low level of detail on the buildings or the generic buildings. I do have some other building elements, right? If you followed through on the stream yesterday, or if you want to check out the stream from yesterday, those buildings are all generated procedurally. So we take these different modules, these different portions of buildings, and we're able to generate these different ones. Hi there, EM. See you there in the chat. Thanks for dropping in. For those of you watching through LinkedIn, if anybody's there, I've noticed LinkedIn doesn't have a chat feature for the streams. So sorry you're not able to interact with me directly through there. If you do leave a comment somewhere through LinkedIn, I'll get a notification right in front of me. If you'd like to join on YouTube, we can definitely interact in the chat through there. But anywho, now that I've gone through that, so we'll also add a fence, right? So we have this glowing fence as part of the guardhouse that we cross through. And I want to extend that fence onto the street as well to create this division between the highway and the sort of residential area. Not have it be as tall, or maybe just tall enough where like we start to see the tops of trees and the top of street lights on the other side. But again, we can sort of mask out whatever it is that's happening immediately at the ground level. So we focus in on the car. Perhaps the blue glow on the fence, a sort of like futuristic electrified fence, might be a bit too much with the glowing car as well. So we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. As first, we're going to throw in a fence there. We'll throw some more roadblocks on the edge and possibly add in some fence where these roadblocks that the car dodges, zips through as well. So it's more obvious that the car has dodged this obstacle or has like gotten into the right lane. With the foreground sort of fixed out like that, we can also add in some lights to some of the windows on the building. Real easy. That would just be modifying some of those building modules that are thrown on the procedural buildings. I can just edit that one module and we'll see that edit apply through all those buildings. And then moving on to the further background, the towers in the foreground, I'd like to change the colors of the lights to be more blue, purplish, those type of tones, to have the warmer tones focused in on the car. The buildings all the way in the background, they need some sort of like more detailing. So the camera bokeh, or like the depth of field here, is helping me out a little bit to like hide some of the detail in the background and focus in more on the foreground. But we got to introduce a bit more detail into those towers that are way far out, such as lit up you know, really just more lights. More lights would help, or maybe more surface imperfections like we're seeing on the towers that are closer. Right at the very end, we could see there just maybe carrying through that language. If I pause right here, right there, we can add in some more buildings, trees, street lamps, and kind of see that we have access into the city, into that portion, you know, more urban approach to this area, this design right here. So there's little pockets to really focus on besides the overall side of the street here. The tunnel, I'm not too concerned about. Perhaps like a smoother bevel or like another feature that I could add to the tunnel. But with the end of the competition coming in close, and with me having a trip this weekend, I'm having to really be efficient with my time here. And, you know, I've seen some of the submissions for the competition. It is really gnarly. Some people have made some amazing works, and maybe, you know, if I make it into the top 100, that would honestly be a surprise. But it's really the fact that through this challenge and through participating, I've done so much in this software that I hadn't done before. And it's really given me some insight in how to approach these challenges in the future. Seriously, setting aside time to identify what it is that I know how to do already and tackle that first. And then the unknowns, such as car animation and things like that, really create a pedagogy of like following tutorials to get those things right. So some of those things that I know for future challenges will show up on stream, and some of those things that I need to learn on my own obviously will not, right? And I'll do that development on my own and report back onto streams once I kind of hone in on those skills. So with that, let's get right into it. We have the Blender file right here in the background, and the main thing right now is it's really hard to work with. It's taking up a lot of resources. I should also plug in the computer so that it runs nice. There we are. So we gotta make this a bit more efficient. So first of all, I mean, I would like to keep the car in the view so I can reference everything to the subject. However, as I'm working on these individual elements, I, for example, don't need to see the background first. So we can hide in the skyline. We could hide, let's see, what are you part of? We can hide buildings. All right, we could hide the building modules. There we go. Hide more buildings. The car will keep around. And then in the foreground here, we have the barrier. Here's all our different modules that are being used for the building. So we could start there. That could be a real easy fix. Street stuff. We can hide the street stuff for now. Yeah, let's focus in on that building element first. So adding some lights onto these procedural buildings that are generated here. This box that you see right here is actually fog. So it's a fog that I added. So you can see there, it's really encasing or closing in on the car. So I noticed that having fog throughout the scene was pretty problematic. It hid a lot, but just having it within the area that the camera and the car move in, it gives that effect without being so overwhelming, so overpowering. Moving into the camera view, we'll hide that volume. Ooh, it's been kind of weird to select things from the camera view. So there we see the street and we see these buildings. So we got to find some of these building modules. So in the collections, we have our middle tier levels, we have our roof elements, and we have our ground floor walls. Here we go. So we just got to find these, and in order to find them, I can just select them here in the layer structure. We can see it highlighted back there, but pressing period on the number pad will make it snap right over to that object. So for the ground floor, we could perhaps turn on one of these two windows. So the way that I'd go about that is I'd switch over to material preview. We can see here we have a window material. So I'll go ahead and select this window. And I go over to materials. I'm going to add a new material slot for this object right over here, and actually assign the same material that we had here, the reflective material, into that other slot. So we'll search here for reflective, and that's the same window material. But now we can hit this icon right over here. We see that 8 elements have this reflective material, being, you know, all these windows. So we'll hit assign. Oh, sorry, before we hit assign, we're going to hit right here, new material. So it's actually going to duplicate that material, and it's going to be called 001. We'll call it reflective emissive. Okay, so hopefully just adding in some emission over here will make it look good enough to look like it's lit up. So we can add maybe like a warm tone light, just slightly ambient, higher in value, maybe around there for saturation. And emission. So the strength for the emission is hard to gauge. Here in material preview, we could see some of those windows back there lighting up. So that's fine. It's good enough. We'll go into the camera view, tab out of that element. And this is the tricky part. We're just going to see right there. I mean, it looks fine from material preview. I'm going to quickly drop into rendered view. And we are incredibly dark because I took away so much light from the scene. And that's potentially because some of these buildings in the background, if I bring some of them back, not these, some of the buildings in the foreground were providing a lot of light. There's also the compositor. So I noticed that the scene is quite dark, and what I needed to do was actually use the compositor to bring back some light. So to quickly see how that's working, once we have the final render outputted, I'm not sure what this is doing here. Ooh. That's not meant to be there. So we have some color correction going on over here. And the ultimate effect of that is to modify the rendering. So we have an increase in gamma all over the scene. We have an increase in gamma on the shadows, which is brightening up those really dark areas. And we have some gain as well on the shadows. So this is brightening up the overall render towards the end. So what I really want to gauge here in the render preview is the fact that these lights are lit up, but they're not overpowering, which is really all it is that I'm trying to accomplish. So we'll go back to material preview. We set an emission strength of 2, so I'm going to roll with that for all the other ones as well. So going back into these little building modules, we have 2 different sets for windows. So I can choose to only light up, let's say, lighting up this entire window would be a bit much. So what I can do is actually duplicate this element and move it forward. It's still going to exist in those modules, but you can see here the orientation or the placement of those windows has changed a little bit. So by duplicating this one, knowing that it's still in the appropriate location that it's supposed to be, for the procedural model to work, right? You can see here if I go into edit mode, it's only some of them, right? Automatically, by duplicating it, it's already placed where it needs to be for the script to work. So I can light up this window right here, just going over to materials and doing the same thing, adding material slot, going over here and setting it to reflective emission. So we'll search again for reflective emission. And we will hit assign. There we go. So it is a bit obvious that they are set up in rows, right? But again, that's not really the focus for the scene, and it would take me a bit much of tweaking on the procedural script to modify it so that it staggers. So that's gonna have to do it for those windows, and then for these 2, I can maybe make the left one light up. So reflective emissive. Oops. Is it because this object is mirrored? No. Why did it oh. I didn't add a new material slot. So we're going to switch that back to reflective. There we go. Add a new material slot. Set that one to the reflective emissive and set it for the left-handed element. There we go. Okay, so now we have some lit up windows all over the building, and if I go back into my camera view, we can see that that's adding just a little bit more to the scene. So it's not going to be in focus. We're introducing a fence in between, so we'll go ahead and move on to that portion. How are these buildings still visible? Let's see. This is where it gets to slow down a lot once I get into material preview and rendered mode. So these buildings are part of a collection here. You can also press period in the layer organizer to hide these elements. So we see here this plane. I'm just going to hide from the camera right now. And that's nice. Okay. So we want to arrange that fence all along this side of the wall. And we're going to have to bring in some of the street elements. So we'll turn on that collection with all our street elements. And we have this fence right here. Just going to go ahead and hit Alt D in order to duplicate it as an instance. So if I make any edit to any one of these fences, it's going to apply to all of them. I can then, oops, not hit H, that hides it. I can hit GX and move that over. And now I can set it as an array. So I'll go down to my modifiers and set an array modifier right after the geometry nodes modifier. And we can see here it's increasing in the X direction. I want it to increase in the Y direction. So I'll set it to 1 on the Y and then 0 on the X. And we'll increase the amount of fences that we have. And that does not seem to be working. Why is that? If I close this up, fixed count, fit length, maybe by length. Nope. It must be because of the procedural model. So what I can do here is instead of doing an Alt D, I'll have to make this its own instance or its own object. So I'll go back and hit Shift D instead of Alt D for this one. Rotate it 90 as I just did. Move it on the X. And then actually apply the geometry nodes. And then it disappears. So it doesn't appear to be a type of fence that I'm able to just repeat over and over. Perhaps the geometry node will allow me to do that. So we'll make this taller so that we can access our geometry node editor. And within the geometry nodes, we can look at what parameters we have here. So we have the fence height. We have how many horizontal poles, how many vertical poles, and there's nothing determining the length of it. So I'd have to go into one of these and see where I could set this. So poles, middle, chain link. Perhaps where the chain link is determined, we can see the overall size here. So looking into this, we have a mesh line and there's an offset. We have the geometry for the chain link. Bring in here. So we have a fence line. Okay. Fence line. I'm going to assume is actually what determines the size of this one. So if I made that number larger, it actually made the fence disappear. I'm going to look for that object. So over here, we can find, I'm going to hit period. There we go. Fence object, fence. And I'm looking for the fence line, which is an object that should be existing over here. There we go. Fence line. So if I tab into that and then hit period to zoom in. Okay. That doesn't seem to be like much. And if I scale it, it doesn't quite edit it. Although I probably have to apply the transformation. And if I go into edit mode and scale it, there we go. We see it stretching. So what I need to do here so that I only edit this one and not this original one that I had is select it here. And same thing with the materials earlier. We can hit this icon right over here and copy the node group. So right there, geometry nodes 003. We'll call this long fence without an E. Long fence. So now we can make individual edits to this fence line and not have it edit the other fence. So if we scale this up and hit Control A on all transforms, which would be another way to change the size of that, it's still changing the original fence. So what I'm going to need to do is actually duplicate the fence line as well. We'll do a Shift D and then hit escape. And now we have fence line 001. If I select this new fence we generated and I go over to the side or into the geometry node here for a long fence, I can go back into my chain link element here and switch this object to the new fence line. So perhaps I could search fence line 001. So that's my longer fence line. And then with scaling that one and hitting Control A, all transforms. I'm just testing right now that it is working. Okay. So it's still editing both of them. I'm going to see what's going on with this one over here. So it shouldn't be referencing that one, but it could be because of the node group. So this node group is being used and being referenced in both geometry node setups. Even though I created a new set for this other one, this group right here is still the same group nested inside both geometry nodes setup. So I'm going to need to go into the chain link over here for my new object and hit this number 2 icon to create it a single use. All right, so if I click on that, it's now chain 001 group, and that's chain. So I can go back over here, go back into edit mode, and set it to my original fence line. There we go. So if I go into my original fence line object, ooh, there it is. I can now tab into that and scale it. So we have the poles scaling now, only the poles and not the entire fence, which is fine. I'm going to roll with that for now. I'm just going to extend this fence as much as I would need it, and then I'd go and fix the other poles. So I just want to extend this so that it reaches all the way to the tunnel, which it will. I'll tab out of it, select this fence, and just slide it on the y-axis right there. Cool. So to fix these poles extending all over the place, I'll just select this fence, and in here I got to go into each one of these and set it to the new line work. So right here we have the fence line, and I just have to set it to fence line 1 for all of these poles, or all these little node groups. I'm tabbing in and out of these groups using tab, but I'm entering these groups and exiting them into the main geometry node by just hitting tab once I have it selected. Fence line 001. There we go. Okay, so now we have the one fence, and it looks like I need to set that for this one as well because we've got no poles. So we'll go into all these and make sure that this is set to fence line original one, fence line. Oh. Oh, we also need to set those as unique ones. So if I select this right here, go into, we're on the right geometry nodes here. So each one of these that says 2, we just got to make all of these unique. And then clicking into them to select that new fence line. There we go. So fence line. Poles corner. Fence line. Believe we did it for the chain, and that's the last one. Cool. So we have our fences set up in a ways. So we wanted to bring this right up to the street, or as close to the street to where it extends. So we do have these roadblocks over here. We'll move this over so we kind of have like a shoulder. We don't need this to extend all the way past. So we'll just move it down. There you go. Look at it from the top view. So we can get it to meet up to the guardhouse level. That'd be easier to see where the guardhouse is. There we go. If I brought it into view. So now we have that fence on the side. We wanted to add some of these as well. So what I can do with this concrete barrier in order to add it in for this side over here is to do a Shift D and just move it over in top view so that it matches with the fence. Perfect. And we can get into the array modifier I had already set up here. We had set it to 50. We can just double that or even maybe triple to 150 in order to get it to extend long enough to ride along that side fence. So I'll move it over. Might be a little bit hard to see what I'm doing here, but this line is our roadblock. We'll just make sure it matches this fence all the way over here. Nice. We go into the camera view. All right, we have this fence right here hiding the buildings in the back. And if I go back through some keyframes, we could see there, we could still get to see some of the buildings and the tops of the buildings. Might actually not be worth it at this point to add in some trees, maybe some more street lights, just because those lights would end up coming through. But let's see this in rendered view and see if my suspicions that this is going to be a little bit too overpowering by having it to look like some sort of electrified fence. And give that a second. Perhaps lowering the intensity of the light fence will also make it read a little bit better. Otherwise, I might just have to thicken those wire elements somehow just to make it look more blocky, more solid, less of a chain link fence of today. Okay. So, as I expected, I think this is going to be a bit too bright. I can probably tone this down quite a bit. So we'll go over into the materials and we have the chain link right here. And it's at 10. We'll bring it down to half the intensity of the windows even. We'll just bring that down to 1. Just so it has some glow and some color to it. That's nice. So I know that that's not going to spill the whole scene with light. It's going to do a nice little ambient effect, which will reveal some of the roadblock. All right. Now shifting over into the top view. We're going to do the same thing with the fence for this segment right here. So the fence is basically moving up closer to where the vehicle is. So I'll do a Shift D, move it over here, line up with those barriers. And we do want this one to be shorter. So fortunately, we do have to go through that little bit of editing on the geometry nodes once again. So set this as a new fence. So we'll put this center road fence. And we got to hit all these ones that say 2 once more. So that we create a unique node group for each one of these. We go over to our fence lines. Duplicate that as well and rename that middle fence line. Okay, so now searching just with middle will make it a bit easier. All right. The first thing I want to do is to make sure this is linked properly. So I'll select this fence and for the geometry nodes, pull this up, go into each one of these node groups. And switch it from fence line into middle fence line. There we go. And it's just 4 of them. Go into this one. Besides tabbing into these groups, you could also just click on that icon that I've been hitting on the top right that references as a node group. So I can tab into it, or I could just click on the top right here to get into it. We'll set that as a middle fence line. And pulls in the middle right here, middle fence line. All right, so there's our middle fence. It looks like it's become quite small. So we'll select the line, or we'll actually move the fence into position. So somewhere along the middle of that barricade. We don't need our geometry nodes anymore. We can focus in on our scene. That's about a good starting point. We'll select our middle fence line. There that is. Tab into it and then scale it. And we see there that the vertical line representing our fence right there is extending. So we'll continue to scale that up in edit mode. So we can get the fence to extend all the way. Using objects that use geometry nodes like this is incredibly more efficient than actually working with real geometry, especially when it comes to things that are so small or high detail, like a chain link fence. Like, it sounds very basic, but once you get to thinking that like all of these would be individual lines or geometries, it can get quite taxing for the computer where they, would they be actual geometries. We'll move that on the x-axis so it sits. Isn't it already behind the barricade? I think it's just highlighted. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so if we look at that moment now in the sequence, we can move right. Let's see where it dodges over. There we go. So we have this big pole right here that the car dodges and moves around into in front of another car. Okay, so let's see what that looks like now. Just as a mock-up. So much work into the environment to then just kind of hide it, but it's actually, it reminds me of this one tip I heard once, which was even though you're using depth of field and like blurring out what's not going to be seen, or you're basically blurring out the background and all this stuff that you spent time adding detail, adding different elements to it just to kind of blur it out and have it not be seen. And it's like actually having those details there to then blur it out is what makes it look really good or make it look real in certain occasions. So it's actually to the benefit that ultimately in the scene we'll be able to see that there is a building in the background, that it does have lights, even though this fence covers it up quite a bit. It also, I like how it tracks with the scene too, because when we sort of come out of the tunnel in the very beginning, switch over to solid mode. When we come out of the tunnel, right, it's sort of a reveal right in the beginning of the whole scene, the whole situation. And then when the car cuts in right in front of camera, it just becomes all about the car. And we focus in on the car as it drives off. Okay, so we did our fence. We did our immediate elements in the foreground that we wanted to do. Next, we wanted to, we added more roadblocks, added a fence. Something's wrong with the sound. I've been having some issue like that. Even before I got onto stream, my sound was acting up. There's something I might need to check out later. Let me know if that's any better. I'll try to stay closer to the mic. Hopefully, at least, I hope it's not a digital issue. And then something that can just be mitigated by me talking right into the mic. But yeah. Let me know if that gets any better. Hopefully it's not my internet either. That's been acting up as well. So, with the foreground, trees and light posts between buildings. I'm not so sure about that anymore. I think I want to just make the buildings look a bit more futuristic by adding in some signs and things, like neon signs to them. I think like that will actually impact the scene a lot more. So, and it's something that's already essentially set up. I just have to go in there and tweak that a little bit. Let's see, I'm going to take a moment here. I'm being told that the sound is not working very well. Huh. Let's see, I'm going to take a moment. Being told that the sound is not working very well. I see that it comes in and out a little bit. Maybe if I lower. I don't know. I can hear myself on my own stream. I see. It looks like I might be having some internet connectivity issues to get the stream around. But I'm gonna have to keep carrying on and work this out later. So next element, if we move over onto the buildings, we're gonna make them look a bit more futuristic. Instead of adding trees and light posts, we're just gonna add some sort of like cyber tech elements to the buildings. So before moving on to the very tall towers in the background. So the node setup that we were using earlier to modify the buildings actually has this set up for us. If I go back to those modules, rooftop details, we're going to go into, I might have to, let's see, if I hide my, I'm going to hide my camera for a little bit. Let me see if hiding my face for a while can improve the audio. That's a real bummer. I do think it's my internet connectivity though. Foreground. Rooftop details. I'm looking for the wall details. Ground floor details, first floor. Details for the other floors. So we have air vents and satellites here. And then I think with the air vents, we could even just cheat here and do some tweaking to these air vents so they look more cybernetic. So I go over here to this air vent, hit tab. You can see it's a real basic type of a geometry. And I can even just take these two panels here, add a new material to it, look for that. Just create a new. If I scroll quickly through, I see there. Oh, the chain link. That's what we called it. So I'll just call that a new one, and I'll call it emission 1. All right. It seems like getting rid of my camera has fixed the issue. The cube right there. We can then see when I go into material preview, those should already be applied onto the buildings, and we should start to see some purple pop through on those elements. So there is some purple. We just might have to make it much brighter because it is much smaller in order for it to get seen. So rather than 1, we'll set it to 5. Let's see if we set it over here. Okay, cool. We see some purple lights out in the distance. We can do some other things like add some bands or, oh, there was this one element. Let's see. If I go into the first floor, I think I might have actually deleted it out of this file. There were like these signs. But I can, oh no, it's right here. There we go. It's like a blender sign, but I can tab into this element. I could actually just play with the fact that it says blender or use these different bars right here. Some of these different lines. So by clicking L, like selecting one of these faces and then clicking L, I can actually select a group of these faces. And add a new material to these and set it to my emission again. Assign it to those. I can assign it to these as well. All right, so we got some light bars going on here. Just by hovering over these areas and clicking L to select those sections and assign an emissive material. I'm going to, I suppose if the audio is such an issue at this point that it's cutting out all the time, even with the camera done, there's not much more that I could do there. So I'm going to add these different elements in. Just for the foreground. And I'll have to get off stream to kind of figure out what's going on here and try to find some solution. We'll just make this face emissive and blue as well. we'll set to, there we go, emission 1. We'll copy that, set it to emission 2, and switch it to a blue color. Maybe like a deeper blue, and have it still be pretty intense. All right. So moving on into the main camera view. I can select the geometry nodes on those buildings to have those details kind of pop throughout a bit more. So we don't really see them at the moment. So we'll go into that geometry node editor. For the building, we'll find this section here for the wall props. Prop density, remove from the bottom. So if I do no removals, no removals. There we go. If I increase the prop density, it's already at 1. So what might have happened is these signs are not in the collection they're supposed to be in, which is exactly what I'm seeing here, I believe. So I can select these objects, put them back into the collection where they're supposed to be over here, called signs up. So hit M to put them into, where is the collection? Details first floor. I guess let's send it that way. There we go. Details first floor, signs up. Okay.